a response from the Permanent Mission of Jamaica. We have not been informed if there will be a representative of the government here. I would like to say at the outset, to make it clear, that although I am a professor at George Washington University Law School, and George Washington University's Law School Clinic is one of the petitioners in this hearing, I have had no communication with the clinic about this matter. I have not discussed it with them, and I maintain a complete separation from the clinic during my tenure on the commission. So their participation here is completely independent and without my having any foreknowledge of what they are saying or doing. So I just want to make that clear at the outset. So as is our usual practice, we will ask the petitioners to speak for about 20 minutes. The government will then have the opportunity to respond, and if we have any questions or comments at the end of that period, we will have further dialogue. Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and certainly my sincerest apologies for my late arrival. I wish to beg your indulgence. Of course, we can begin the proceedings, but my ambassador will, in fact, be representing the government of Jamaica. I'm here, of course, in support of her, and she will be making a statement. She's 5 minutes away. So I just wanted to put that on record that it's my ambassador who will be speaking on behalf of the state. And so I don't want to delay the proceedings, but she's on her way. Thank you.
I think we will wait for your ambassador to come so that she can hear all of the comments that are made by the petitioners. You're welcome. Since this is our last hearing of the morning, we have a little bit of flexibility. Thank you very much. We will begin now our hearing on the human rights situation in Jamaica with representatives for the petitioners from Jamaicans for Justice and the International Human Rights Clinic at George Washington Law School. From the Permanent Mission of Jamaica, we're pleased to have with us Ambassador Audrey Marks, Permanent Representative of Jamaica to the OAS, and Mrs. Ann Scott, who is the alternate representative. So as I mentioned before, we will have a presentation from the petitioners for about 20 minutes, a statement from the ambassador, and then if we have the time remaining, we will have some comments or dialogue. So please.
Madam President, Honourable Commissioners, I'm grateful for the opportunity. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Carolyn Gomes. I'm the Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice. With me this morning at the table is our Senior Attorney, Tamara Mohammed, and Professor Carrillo from George Washington, accompanied by Shana Tabak and Letitia Georgit from the George Washington International Law Clinic. We're grateful for the opportunity to provide this update on human rights in Jamaica, the effect of the state of emergency, and I'm going to ask Tamara Mohammed to lead us off.
Good morning. We're here to update you on the state of human rights in Jamaica since the state of emergency. The state of emergency commenced on the 23rd of May 2010 and ended on the 22nd of July 2010. As a result of the state of emergency, we've experienced various violations of human rights abuses that have increased in Jamaica. In our opinion, there have been increased arbitrary detention, there was increased disappearance, there have been increased deaths as a result of the state of emergency. There's also been a passage of a series of crime bills which have highlighted the government's use of legislation to violate human rights. The state of emergency resulted in 4,000 Jamaican citizens being detained, some of whom were children. There were disappearances which included 3 people were taken away by security forces and have not been seen since. This was during the time of the state of emergency. It appears that during the state of emergency, the security forces saw this period as a carte blanche for them to commit further human rights abuses. We have a video which is self-explanatory, which took place, or an incident that took place during the state of emergency.
I hear knock on the door. Somebody say, who's that? And say, Officer. And him say, put on clothes, boy, put on clothes, yeah, go up on the road, we'll check you out. And if my son say, no problem, no problem. So me go say, the man a wrong door enough, because I in a house and living, I really go out of the one, so. So I'm just gonna stay in the house, not going away. And always, Mommy, alright? And I say, yes. You may ever in the house, I read them, I watch TV, or play music. So then you could look at my son and say, my son a gunman. And then see him and see him food. Me I have the paper, the doctor paper, me I show them, say, see the officer. By 4 o'clock now, I start to go. Start to walk and I look for him.
My name is Earl Witter and I'm the Public Defender of Jamaica. Because of the nature of the reports that we were getting of atrocities and of unlawful homicides committed by members of the security forces. And we let them know that in our opinion, these allegations should be investigated because they, on the face of them, appear to be instances of extrajudicial killings.
Every morning I go on the road. I have me a walk all over. I walk Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday till Thursday.
So I went public. Some good seems to have come of that because by Friday, the crime scene crews from the Jamaican Constabulary visited these various sites of alleged extrajudicial killings.
The Thursday morning, I heard me and my daughter go up at the blood bank and I say a police and I ask him name and describe the clothes and so. When he call the soldier say him dead. He was 29-year-old. He lived 1 week after his birthday. Nobody no call me, nothing at all. Me no hear nothing.
In our opinion, until there is a public, independent investigation into the matters that occurred during the state of emergency, the answers that people like Paul at Wellington are looking for will not be able to be heard. The public defender and civil society have asked for a commission of inquiry, an independent commission of inquiry. We have yet to hear that there will be one called. The government has not committed to one being called. We would also like to draw your attention to the increase in the number of extrajudicial killings recorded during the period 2009 to 10. There were 320 fatal killings that occurred during that period. that does not include the 73 people who died during the state of emergency. And although the 73 is the number that we have, there is a possibility that the number is higher than that. There hasn't been an accounting, and therefore that is the reason why we've been asking for an independent public inquiry. This figure shows that 1 in 5 killings in Jamaica are at the hands of security forces. Rather than us speaking to some of these issues, we'd like to share with you another video of an incident that shows the heinous acts that happen in public in Jamaica. The video that we are hoping to show you will show the killing of an individual at the hands of the police. It's caught on video and shows a police officer killing in full view a citizen of Jamaica.
That very day, stabbed to death, the police say.
As you can see, the police officer was standing next to his vehicle, and while standing next to his police vehicle, you saw a vehicle which had a blue stripe on it. That's a Jamaica police vehicle. The police officer had a baton in his hand, used the baton, and then the video shows him shooting at point blank the individual whilst he was laying crippled on the floor. The image itself says more than any words we can say. Unfortunately, we have examples of other cases, including one of the cases on our case file, Mickey Hill, which was a killing that took place in Negril, Jamaica. This was a businessman. This was a well-loved man. This was a man who some called the gentle giant. He was killed by a group of 8 policemen, 7 to 8 policemen. And in this picture, it's very difficult for you to see. However, on the left-hand side, the police officer is wearing a kerchief over his face. We do have a bundle which you will be able to see the photo more clearly than you can at the moment. But the police officer, his face was covered with a kerchief and his identification number was covered. He was obviously in the presence of police officers whose details are on their vests. However, in our opinion, the public would face fear and concern when faced with police officers not dressed appropriately and not identifying themselves. The Commissioner of Police, when we raised this issue, stated that there were no policies in force to deal with the lack of identification, and then later publicly denounced the fact that there are operations conducted in this way. Following the state of emergency, crime bills were enacted, which we say continued to violate individual human rights within Jamaica. These bills did not take into account our constitutional and human rights. The effect of this legislation was to further put in the hands of the Jamaican Constabulary Force power that could be misused. I'll now hand you to our Executive Director, Dr. Carolyn Gomes, to continue our report.
Next slide. In the report, we detail abuse of power and arbitrary detention that occurred under the state of emergency, but was occurring previously, and which has been documented in numerous reports, including the report, your own report, Preliminary Observations on the Jamaica Visit. Since the state of emergency, our statistics indicate a 41% increase in the number of complaints of arbitrary and prolonged detention by the police. And the 2008 report made to the Commission by George Washington points out the shortcomings not only in the detention legislation, but in the de jure practice, the de facto practices of the police in keeping people for prolonged periods without access to the courts. Also of interest to us is the state of children, juvenile detention. Children as young as 14 were detained under the state of emergency. In fact, one of those who has disappeared under the state of emergency, last seen in the custody of the police, was 16 years old, not been seen since. In this case, during the state of emergency and continuing since then, children are housed in adult facilities in contact with adults in contradistinction to the law and inhumane conditions, unsatisfactory if not inhumane in virtually all the facilities in which they're being held. We acknowledge the establishment of INDICOM as possibly a good step in the right direction. It has been given broad powers of investigation. But unfortunately, at this point in time, it is overseeing a notoriously ineffectual and inept Bureau of Special Investigations run by the police, and it is facing severe and undue delays by the Director of Public Prosecutions in making rulings. The average time for a file to land on her desk and be put out with a ruling is more than 1 year. The problems that this Commission will face with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is highlighted by what has happened in this last 2 weeks in the Mickey Hill case. The Commissioner arrested on warrant, sworn before a Justice of the Peace, the policeman allegedly involved in the shooting. The Director of Public Prosecutions immediately asserted an absolute right to be the only one to charge police, overturned the arrest warrant, and then issued a nolle prosequi in order to take over prosecution of the matter. She has publicly said that she is the only one that can charge police. We acknowledge also the Office of the Special Coroner has finally been established 2 years after the Act was passed and will begin investigating in March of this year. Whether it will make a difference to the coroners' courts island-wide and their failing to provide credible or timely processes, which have been well documented to the Commission previously, it remains to be seen. We want now to highlight particularly this case, to highlight the non-investigation of allegations of abuse by police, which allows impunity to persist. Madam President, in 2009, we presented 21 serious allegations against Superintendent Delroy Hewitt to the Commissioner of Police. This included 40 allegations of being involved in 14 extrajudicial killings. When we got no response from the Commissioner, we detailed these allegations to the Police Services Commission. To date, we have not been provided with any credible response to our concerns. We are not aware of any credible investigation being done. We have not received a written response to numerous letters that we have written. In 2010, this gentleman is cited in the UN Rapporteur on Torture's report as having threatened the UN Special Rapporteur. But in 2010, after that report was released, the Commissioner of Police put up for promotion to Assistant Commissioner of Police, Superintendent Delroy Hewitt. And as quoted, I am quoting him from a meeting with us, he is one of my best men. I also wanted to say to you, Madam President, that all the issues we discuss in our report are illustrated in cases at the Commission. The Janice Allen case, Patrick Genius case, detail the problems of abuse of witnesses, impunity, corruption in evidence, failures of the DPP's office to be proactive in fighting impunity. The Sean Duncan case brings to the fore the illegal, abusive, and untenable use of detention by the police. The Amani Wedderburn case, and here I point out that Amani Wedderburn and Janice Allen were both children. Amani 14, Janice 13 when they were killed by police. The Amani Wedderburn case details the failures of the investigative processes and the prosecution processes. The Hewitt precautionary measures has been denied by the Commission, but you are treating it as a petition as per your communication to us. It highlights all the problems of abusive policing, the culture that allows favoured crime fighters to commit multiple atrocities with impunity. And many of these issues highlighted were also highlighted in the preliminary report of the Commission on its visit to Jamaica. Just in passing to let you know that the Universal Periodic Review recommendations were adopted on the 17th of March at the UN, but many of the recommendations rejected by Jamaica stand in contradiction to stated commitments to the furtherance of human rights for its citizens, and particularly point to their rejection of the recommendation to repeal the Buggery Law in an effort to protect LGBT community in Jamaica. In conclusion, The government of Jamaica continues to fail to meet their obligation to safeguard and promote human rights within Jamaica. We contend that the situation has worsened and is continuing to worsen since the state of emergency, and we need the intervention of the Honourable Commission. We would ask that the Commission attempt to complete its report of the Jamaica visit, because based on the preliminary observations, we expect strong recommendations. We ask that you use the opportunity of the petitions before you to make rulings that will strengthen the accountability and prevent the worsening human rights violations. We would ask specifically that you make, in these rulings, in the forthcoming special report, that you make recommendations to the government of Jamaica to address in a specified time frame discriminatory policing practices. I'm so sorry. That result in abrogation of rights. And you'll find examples in the Duncan petition. We ask that you address impunity for police fatal shootings. And you'll find it in the Hewitt, the Allen, the Wedderburn, the Genius petitions. We ask that you address delays in the justice system and weaknesses of the prosecutorial mechanisms. I am so sorry. Specifically, Madam President, if you could insist that the government of Jamaica not put up for promotion police officers who are alleged to have committed fatal police shootings, at least until all judicial processes have cleared them of involvement. We'd ask you to encourage the government to implement recommendations that you have made, that the UN Special Rapporteur has made, that the UN Human Rights Council has made, and encourage them to report on this implementation in a timely fashion. Madam President, the voices of the victims are crying out to be heard. We must ensure that those lives were not lost in vain, and tell the government of Jamaica to account for their failure to ensure the rights of Jamaicans. Madam President, it is not numbers, it is lives. This is Mr. Hill, a father, a husband, a worker, a decent man. Jamaica needs answers. We ask the Commission to seek them.
Thank you very much. I'm quite sympathetic with your cough. That's how I ended up with a broken heel. Stepping off a stage when I was coughing. So I would like to then recognize Ambassador Audrey Marks for the Government of Jamaica. Thank you.
Madam President, Commissioners, Dr. Carolyn Gomes, representatives of the George Washington University of International Human Rights Clinic. First, let me thank you, Madam President, for allowing me the additional time to attend this morning. And I must also note, Dr. Gomes, that as someone who strongly supports the work of Jamaicans for Justice, it does feel a little strange to be sitting across the table from you. But I'm heartened because I know the government of Jamaica and the Jamaicans for Justice share the same ideals for the human rights of Jamaicans. On behalf of the government of Jamaica, I wish to make this presentation to this hearing of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which has been convened at the request of Jamaicans for Justice and the George Washington University International Human Rights Clinic. I will attempt to respond in the limited time available to some of the matters raised in the submissions by the mentioned entities. These relate to extrajudicial killings, arbitrary detentions, conditions of detentions, impunity, children in police custody, and the 2010 state of emergency. Before addressing these issues, I wish to refer in the first instance to the characterization of by the petitioners of the deterioration of the Jamaican authorities' respect for basic human rights, following the security operations and the state of emergency last May. We are concerned that such a characterization gives the erroneous impression of state-sanctioned human rights violations in Jamaica. There is no credible evidence or factual basis for this assertion. Madam President, I turn briefly to the specific issues raised. A more comprehensive response has been submitted. First, the issue of extrajudicial killings. Jamaica acknowledges that in the context of extremely high levels of violent crime, there have been a number of cases of police shootings. Some of these instances stem from the threat from organized criminal gangs and persons involved in the illicit drugs and arms trade and the use of force in self-defense. Notwithstanding the need to respond proportionately to threats to their lives, there have been several instances of questionable police shootings, which suggest excessive and unnecessary use of force against civilians. The government is firm that such use of force is unacceptable and can in no circumstances be sanctioned by the state. In recognition of the need to address these instances of excessive use of force, steps have been taken to strengthen the legal and institutional framework to investigate and prosecute alleged cases of extrajudicial killings. And in this regard, I highlight the enactment of the Independent Commission of Investigations Act 2010 and the establishment of an Independent Commission of Investigations, INDECOM. INDECOM replaces the Police Public Complaints Authority and is set up as a commission of Parliament. Its mandate is to investigate allegations of abuse, including fatal shootings, by members of the security forces and other agents of the state. The establishment of INDECOM will significantly improve the independence of the investigative process. Emphasis is also being placed on enhancing the training being offered to security personnel, with a special focus on the fundamentals of ethics, use of force, and human rights. The overall objective is to reduce the number of complaints of police excesses and to restore public confidence in and support for the police. Madam President, with regards to conditions in prisons and detention facilities, the state acknowledges that the conditions demand significant improvement. The fact is that resource constraints continue to hinder the government's effort to improve the conditions in detention facilities to satisfactory levels. Nevertheless, some action is being taken to improve the living conditions of inmates in all institutions and to address the challenges of overcrowding. In this regard, an extensive repair and maintenance program, which includes the retrofitting of cells and sanitary conveniences, is being undertaken. The government has also budgeted for the financial year 2011-12 for 3 new locations for additional detention cells. This is expected to diffuse the problem of overcrowding in police holding areas. In addition, the Ministry of National Security is in discussion with private interest regarding proposal to design, fund, and build new correctional facilities for the government of Jamaica. Another challenge which impacts the prison population is the pace at which cases are disposed of due to the current backlog of many courts. Efforts are being made to address this. Madam President, the government acknowledges that the current situation of children in the juvenile justice system requires urgent attention and resources to enhance the total well-being of the children it serves. It also agrees that keeping children in need of care and civil protection in police lockups is unacceptable. The government of Jamaica is in the final stages of constructing a newly retrofitted facility to house children in remand. All children in remand will be removed from police lockups, allowing them to become the responsibility of the Department of Correctional Services. The facility will create capacity for 208 children who will be exposed to rehabilitation, health care, and skills training. The intent is to strengthen rehabilitation programs to include therapeutic and cognitive programs and a wider variety of skills programs. Indeed, it is recognized that in responding to children in conflict with the law, what is required is a shift in focus with emphasis on the rehabilitative components rather than the punitive. Despite strengthening of the laws to provide better protection for these children, the data show that practice has not always kept pace with current trends. The system has not developed the capacity to respond adequately to the increasing demand for spaces, nor has it implemented child-centered, rights-based interventions for the rehabilitation of child offenders, consistent with international agreements or our existing laws. Consequently, children are being housed in facilities which are totally inappropriate. The government of Jamaica, at the highest level, is committed to addressing this problem. Madam President, I turn to the events in West Kingston in May last year. The Commission will recall that the government provided information on the circumstances that precipitated the state of emergency and the action of the security forces during the period 23rd to 26 May 2010. During the state of emergency, the Jamaica Constabulary Force acted on the Emergency Powers Act and regulations of 2010. Almost 4,000 persons were detained under the Act and its regulations. All detainees were processed and interviewed. In instances where detainees were fingerprinted and or photographed, this was done within the law and solely for investigative purposes. This process led to the arrest and charge of some detainees for criminal acts committed. Investigations are ongoing into the conduct of the operation and the circumstances of the 73 civilian deaths. International expertise was provided for the forensic examinations which were required. The public defender, who established a unit in West Kingston, continues his investigation into the incident. Contrary to the assertion that persons can be detained indefinitely before being brought before the courts, there are legislative provisions that persons who are detained must either be granted bail or brought before a resident magistrate periodically to have their detention reviewed. Finally, Madam President, it is erroneous to state that data and statistics are not being kept on a number of individuals arrested or in police custody at any given time. The Jamaican Constabulary Force keeps a record of all persons arrested or detained. Therefore, Madam President, I wish to reiterate Jamaica's unwavering commitment to democratic principles and the promotion and protection of human rights enshrined in our Constitution and in practice. 3 days ago, the House of Representatives unanimously adopted a Charter of Rights which aims to protect the fundamental rights and freedoms of Jamaicans. We do recognize that there are challenges and areas that require urgent attention. I can assure you that the government is committed to taking steps to address the identified problems within the limits of available resources. We are prepared to constructively engage with all stakeholders to achieve this goal. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much for that statement and for the reports of the new bills that have been adopted, the Charter of Rights, the 2010 law on the Independent Commission. I think it would be very helpful if we could get copies of those. It would be quite useful for us. And I know that you're not in a position to immediately answer questions, but perhaps the petitioners know, or it would be possible to get an answer. Will the Commission have power to investigate retroactively, that is, for allegations of unlawful killings or police misconduct from before the period when it's instituted, or is it prospective only? That would be my main question for right now, but as I say, it would be very helpful for us to have texts of the new crime laws that you referred to, the Commission law, the Charter of Rights. So thank you very much. So I don't know if my other commissioners, my colleagues here, have questions. Commissioner Mahia.
Madam President,
Gracias, President.
Thank you. Just to note that the Solicitor General was here earlier we were making all efforts to have his presence this morning. He had to, in fact, go on a trip to China, and we were trying to make effort to ensure that we can answer questions this morning. That is not going to be possible, but our Prime Minister and the government of Jamaica wanted to clearly show that this is an important event for Jamaica, being the Commission and looking at what is happening with human rights. And that is why I'm here, and I'm fully prepared to take all questions, make notes of same, and ensure that answers are given.
Madam President, if I may, the law does...
Can we get all the
Question, and it's great.
Sí, yo quería agradecer la presentación de los peticionarios y las peticionarias, así como la presencia de la embajadora y de la representante alterna del Estado de Jamaica. Quisiera... ¿Ahora? Ok. La Comisión Interamericana estuvo en Jamaica y, en efecto, la información que hemos recibido después de la visita que realizamos en Jamaica, visita in loco, que se realizó a finales del año 2008, nos permite de alguna manera identificar algunas problemáticas que ya había identificado la Comisión y que aparentemente no solo continúan, sino que algunos elementos por lo que nos han presentado el día de hoy permanecen o se han agravado. Hay temas que creo que es importante que el Estado de Jamaica nos suministre información, pero quisiera plantear decir, más que plantear, la preocupación respecto de algunas leyes que se habrían durante el estado de emergencia aprobado, que establecen mayor tiempo de detención sin control jurisdiccional. Este era uno de los temas que planteó la Comisión en su visita como de mayor preocupación, porque nosotros pudimos identificar con muchísima claridad dos elementos principales. El primero, que en el tiempo de reclusión sin control judicial había un amplísimo margen de arbitrariedad en muchísimos de los casos donde tuvimos información, y además la Comisión recibió información consistente de diversos sectores que ratificaban este tipo de información, y las entrevistas que mantuvo la Comisión con distintas agencias gubernamentales también nos informaban que, en efecto, este era un problema que tenía Jamaica y que quería abordarse. Sin embargo, la información que estamos recibiendo es que, pese a que había un reconocimiento de que esto era un problema, durante el año pasado se intensificaron leyes que habrían ampliado el margen de detenciones administrativas y policiales sin control jurisdiccional, con lo cual pareciera que habría una respuesta contradictoria a un problema identificado que tenía que ver con violaciones graves de los derechos humanos, sobre todo en un sector de la población que se identificaba como de menores recursos. El otro problema que identificamos nosotros con muchísima claridad es que habían graves problemas estructurales en la administración de justicia para erradicar la impunidad por los casos de violencia letal por parte de funcionarios de seguridad del Estado. Y en esos casos, tuvimos la oportunidad de entrevistarnos con el equipo policial que estaba encargado de realizar investigaciones dentro de la propia policía, y el propio equipo policial nos hablaba de una multiplicidad de obstáculos para poder identificar mecanismos transparentes, mecanismos eficientes y mecanismos que pudieran erradicar las propias complicidades internas que generaban mayor impunidad en los casos de violencia letal, además violencia letal identificada, como dije anteriormente, en procesos de criminalización de la pobreza, que fue lo que claramente identificó la Comisión Interamericana durante su visita in loco. Así que quisiera tener, si no es el momento, porque muy claramente lo ha expresado la embajadora, si quisiera tener de parte al menos de los peticionarios y de parte del gobierno de Jamaica información posterior, pero más información respecto a estos puntos, y también, por último, plantear mi profunda preocupación por afirmaciones y citas como las que hicieron aquí respecto de la superintendente adjunto de la policía. Creo que uno de los planteamientos que la Comisión ha sido reiterada en los 50 años de historia que tiene la Comisión, es la gravedad que supone el hecho de que altas autoridades hagan planteamientos de reconocimiento a funcionarios que se encuentran al menos investigados por uso excesivo de la fuerza, ejecuciones extrajudiciales y en general violaciones de derechos humanos. Yo creo que este tema es fundamental que el gobierno de Jamaica asuma, como asumió durante la visita in loco que realizó la Comisión, claros cuestionamientos frente a rechazar claramente la violencia letal y el uso excesivo de la fuerza por parte de la policía. Creo que las imágenes fueron, lo poco que vimos de las imágenes que nos plantearon los peticionarios fueron claramente gráficas, que graficaban, como reitero, información que fue y que pudo constatar la Comisión Interamericana en esta visita. Así que el llamado es a plantear la preocupación por declaraciones de este tipo y a pedir más información respecto a estas leyes y el mecanismo de aplicación de las mismas que nos permite identificar una situación bien grave en Jamaica que ya ha venido identificando la Comisión.
Commissioner Escobar Gil is the rapporteur on the rights of persons in all forms of detention, so I'm sure he has some comments and questions.
Sí, en primer lugar, quiero agradecer la presentación hecha tanto por los peticionarios como por el Estado, que nos permiten conocer mejor la situación general de derechos humanos en Jamaica y en especial la situación de las personas privadas de la libertad. Ya por lo avanzado del tiempo, yo no voy a hacer preguntas, pero sí quiero pedirle tanto a los peticionarios como al Estado, en primer lugar, pues, si nos pueden proporcionar toda la información que sirvió de base a la presentación que se ha hecho, especialmente en lo referente a la situación y a las violaciones de los derechos humanos de las personas privadas de la libertad, al uso abusivo y excesivo de la detención preventiva y a la situación de los niños privados de la libertad. Igualmente al Estado, bueno, lo primero que hay que señalar es pues exaltar o resaltar el reconocimiento que ha hecho el Estado sobre las graves condiciones en que se encuentran las personas privadas de la libertad. Pero yo quiero llamar la atención de que la Comisión no acepta, la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos y los distintos órganos internacionales de derechos humanos no han aceptado como justificación a esa situación la insuficiencia de recursos por parte del Estado. En realidad, en todos nuestros países, el común denominador es la insuficiencia de los recursos, pero deben promoverse e impulsarse unas políticas públicas dirigidas a resolver la situación de estas personas. Por esa razón yo quería pedirle información al Estado de que nos proporcionen toda la información que se tenga sobre las políticas públicas y las medidas del Estado orientadas a resolver los problemas de las personas privadas de la libertad y también qué acciones está promoviendo el Estado para prevenir, para investigar y para sancionar el uso excesivo y el abuso de la detención preventiva. Y finalmente también quisiera pedir información al Estado sobre las medidas a las que ya hizo referencia la embajadora en torno a el mejoramiento de las condiciones de los niños y a evitar que los niños se encuentren privados de la libertad junto con adultos, lo que viola todos los estándares internacionales en la materia. Muchas gracias.
Elizabeth Abi-Merched, who's the Deputy Executive Secretary, would also like to ask a question.
Thank you, Madam President. Very briefly, following up on the issues that have been raised by the commissioners, I wanted to ask something specific. When the Commission carried out its visit to Jamaica, it received information about difficulties for persons who are put in detention but lack economic resources to pay for their own attorneys. We heard about difficulties in the ability to access counsel provided by the state, and so it would be very helpful to have updated information about how persons in detention can have access to state-appointed legal counsel and whether the resources that are available to provide those services meet the need as it stands now. Thank you.
Thank you. I realize we've asked for a lot of information, and we hope when you have the opportunity you can forward that to us, but perhaps the petitioners are in a position to answer some of the questions that we've asked at this point.
Madam President, thank you. Yes, the first question was your own about the INDECOM and whether it has retroactively. It actually has taken over all the cases that were previously at the Police Public Complaints Authority. So it's now following all of those cases, and that caseload dates back, I think, 15 years. So yes, it will be investigating that. As it stands now, it is still relying on the police to do the investigation, but it is in the process of employing investigators. So we acknowledge that the INDECOM is a good move. We hoped that we pointed out for the Commission the challenges that it is already facing in order to do its work, particularly at the level of the prosecutorial authority, and the signal that it is not sending about impunity. Commissioner Mejia, you spoke of the concerns of prolonged detention and the arbitrariness. Unfortunately, it is exactly as it was before, if not worse. Entire groups of people, young men from 16, sometimes as young as 14, upward, were detained on the basis that they were in an area. They were processed, photographed, fingerprinted, and under the state of emergency regulations, that data which normally the police are not allowed to keep, unless they charge people, that data has been kept under the specially promulgated regulations. So we have 4,000 plus people whose data is now being kept by the police. We mentioned it in our report. The conditions were horrific, untenable, and the situation was untenable before. There are reports in the press, some of which we've provided to the Commission, about 60-odd people being kept in a jail cell 8 by 12. About entire communities being detained and processed, some of them to the point where you have 6 and 7 children in a cell built for one. So the conditions are horrific, unacceptable, and arbitrary. Following on Commissioner Mrs. Abi-Meshad's question, legal aid, the provision of legal aid is based on the police saying to a detainee, you have a right to counsel. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you. It is not a routine right in our country, and people don't know. If the police do not tell people this, they don't know. And if the police don't tell them, they don't give them that phone call. It is the police duty to call. It has been our experience that the police themselves don't know that they're supposed to help people to find attorneys. So we have reported to you on the case of Sean Duncan, who spent 4 weeks in detention, was never charged, and was never told that he had access to an attorney. Yeah? And that is a norm. It is not. It is a practice. It is not the law. It is a practice that continues and gets no condemnation from the state. And to the point of detention statistics, I'm very glad to hear that the police keeps detention statistics, because they are not released and nobody has access at any point in time to how many people are kept. the data is not released, is not available to anyone. If you were to ask the Commissioner of Police tomorrow to tell you how many people he has in detention throughout the island, I think it would take quite a while before that data got to you, because it is not routinely collated, and requests for it made by us and others are ignored. The structural problems to eliminate impunity have not changed. And in fact, in our view, last year's events have in some senses worsened the situation, because they have made policing that is hardline, that involves killing, that involves locking down communities. It has made it acceptable, has made it an effective crime-fighting tool. And here I quote our Commissioner. So that the 320 persons killed by the police, which alone represents a more than 20% increase over the year before. But when you add that to those killed during the state of emergency, you end up with a statistic that 1 in 5 Jamaicans who died violently from the gun last year died at the hands of the police. That is unacceptable, that is untenable. But it has become acceptable given the rhetoric around the state of emergency and around crime fighting. The statistics on children. When the Prime Minister spoke to the Parliament last year in February, he detailed 68 children in police lockups across the island. As of last week, that number was 110 remained in detention in police lockups across the island. And as I've said previously, as many as 7 in a room. There's a newspaper report of it. There's a report done by the Office of the Children's Advocate on children in conflict in the law, which details the horrific conditions. We acknowledge that a new facility is being built, but my child, if it was my child in detention, was not to wait a year on a new facility to be built in breach of the law and in breach of all decent tenets of humanity.
Thank you very much. We have about 3 minutes left. I want to thank you for coming. I don't know if you want to make any final remarks before we close the session.
Thank you, Madam President. Just again to reiterate that we are noting and we will ensure that response is given to all questions and concerns mentioned.
Madam, can I just make one point? We do have copies of our report. I know there was one point made by Mr. Gill that you wanted copies of all of the documents. We will make them available in respect of the report that we have been presenting today.
Thank you. For future reference, we have asked all petitioners to send materials at least 1 week in advance of the hearings, so we have time to read and study the materials. So in the future, please, if you can send it to us ahead of time, we will be very grateful. Thank you very much. Thank you to the government as well for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President and Commissioners.